Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Joe Palmetto Law Show. Today's topic is going to be the police. What would society be like without the police? And the reason I'm covering this topic is because it came up in a couple of other podcasts and YouTube channels that I follow. I'm a big fan of the Joe Rogan Experience. I watch most of those episodes. I was watching one recently, and Russell Brand was his guest. I like Russell Brand. I respect Russell Brand. Joe and Russell Brand were talking about politics, and Russell brought up. He said, Joe, why do we need to have the government? Why do we need to have this apparatus, these institutions, okay, to run our society? He said to Joe, look, if all of that went away, he said, I think we'd be okay. We may be okay. How would society be? Society would be okay. So that got me thinking a little bit. And then I'm watching Joe Rogan a few weeks later, and he has this guy on, Michael Malice, who I never heard of before. Apparently he's an anarchist, and he's got a big Twitter presence, and he's talking to Joe about a similar thing, saying, how would it be without, if society was a little bit different, et cetera, et cetera. And what if we didn't have this whole apparatus, this whole structure? And I think Joe said something along the lines of, well, what are you saying, that we shouldn't have the police? What do we do about the police? And Michael Malice said, well, we would have the police, okay, but they would be private security forces. So those two podcasts, Joe Rogan and Russell Brand sort of being a proponent of anarchism, and Michael Malice, the same thing, anarchism, where we don't have a state, we don't have taxes set up. I don't want to focus on anarchism, but I want to focus on what the world would be like, okay, without the police. So we're going to delve into that a little bit further. I would ask you to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Like this video. Subscribe to my podcast, my show. Leave a comment, any type of comment. I will reply. You have something to say about this show, we will talk about it. And we will go from there. So subscribe, like, and share. Thank you very much. I guess there's an argument for and against police. All right. And you can see in our current culture, many of the arguments against police, the police are getting, a bad rep. Some argue that the police oppress minorities. Some argue that the police oppress poor people. Some argue that the police are discriminatory in nature. And rather than preventing crimes, stopping crimes, or capturing criminals, to a large degree, they're bringing about negative consequences on individuals, especially the individuals in our society with less money, less means, less status, less prestige. In the past several years, Black Lives Matter. We see, there's been there's a highlighter on police shootings. So those are perhaps some of the negative effects of the police. They may put innocent people into jail. Some would also argue, and this is maybe out of the anarchist toolkit, that the police are a weapon, a cudgel used by the elites to keep their status and their position. Those are some of the negative arguments against the police. And you're right, Yolanda, without the police, many lawyers may not have their jobs. That's another negative effect coming from an attorney here. But we all know what the positive elements of that a police force brings, right? The police investigate crimes, they arrest, capture criminals, and their very presence deters criminals from taking criminal action, or potential criminals. So they investigate, they capture, they detain, and they deter. They enforce our laws. Our criminal laws, the laws on the book, would not be enforceable. Many laws would not be enforceable without the police. So you have, on the one hand, the police are unfair. That's really the crux of the argument. They're unfair. They take unfair action at times, which can lead to perhaps to people dying and people getting hurt. Those are some of the negative elements of the police. An anarchist would also argue that the police are very expensive. It is the citizens' taxpayer dollars that are going to fund the police. All right, but the positive part of the police are that they keep order, they suppress crime, deter crime, capture criminals. So what would society be like without the police? Maybe where we should start is, have there been societies without police in the past? And I did a little bit of research on this topic. My best friend, Wikipedia, and maybe I can drop some links. But what I was looking into, mainly from a Western perspective, so we're talking Western Europe and England, the first organized police force that I found records of was in the 1600s in France. So we're talking 17th century France. King Louis XIV implemented a police force in Paris. And the goal of that police force was sort of what, like the modern police force today, to keep the peace and quiet in the city of Paris. So that was sort of the beginning of this organized uniform police force. We're talking the 1600s. Prior to that, in Europe, you have feudal Europe, okay? And, the feudal setup is you have the lord, all right, and then the nobles, and then the peasants or the serfs. During those times, there was no police force. England started to get written laws. There were written laws in some of these countries and territories, but essentially what would happen is, if the police, if something needed to be done about criminals or wrongdoing, the local lord would call men at arms, and they would go out and enforce their own form of justice. Or perhaps the village itself would have to come together and enforce justice. Prior to that, we go back to, let's say, Roman times. In Roman times, the city of Rome itself, there was no police force. And in fact, and this is the Roman Republic days, there was no police force. And in fact, no one inside the city walls were allowed to carry weapons of war. So you almost had a sort of anarchy-like state within the city of Rome. All right. But what happened was, powerful people, powerful senators, and rich individuals, they would form gangs. They would pay for and form their own gangs. And of course, there would be weapons within the city walls regardless. And these gangs would engage in a type of gang warfare for a whole variety of reasons, mainly to gain political power. But there was no universal police force to keep order at the time. And further down the line, this would damage the Roman Republic. So the point I'm trying to make is that the concept of the police is fairly new. Policing, having a 24-hour force that polices a city. You go back far enough, it just didn't exist. So, what would happen if we got rid of the police today? If we got rid of the police, would we get rid of a lot of the bad things? Probably. So-called police oppression, their unfair treatment of minorities or poorer people would go away. We would no longer have the police. Also, the private citizenry wouldn't have to be taxed in order to pay for and supply a police force. But would we have a recurrent rise in crime? I believe that we would. I believe that we would. The of course, a criminal is going to be more likely to commit a criminal act if they don't believe that there is anybody out there who is going to try to stop them or catch them after they have done it. You lose that deterrent. So the argument from anarchists is we would have private police forces, that the people who could afford it would pay to have security and police forces, which would protect their businesses and perhaps their homes. My argument against that is that it would leave the poorer people in society out. The people who don't have the means would not have the benefit of that private police force. So really, would crime go up? I would have to say yes, absolutely. Those with the means and the money would likely be able to prevent crime within their walls, within their house or their community, but those without it wouldn't get the benefit of that private police force. At least in my opinion, they would not. Now, there's also the anarchists argue that they could raise small militias who could go out and enforce the police or do forensic investigations, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it just seems a little impractical to me, and also maybe something too late. It would come along a little too late, all right, to really prevent any crime, and it may not be as professionalized of a force as exists now. So perhaps they would be able to get away with more crime. So, the whole concept of the private police force, I don't really buy it. At the same time, I saw an interesting video about a small town, I believe in Ireland or England. It was a small town off on an island off of the main island, either Ireland or England. And this town did not have any police. But it was a town, I believe, of 50 to 100 people. And when one of the individuals in the town was asked, why don't you have a police? They say, if anything happened, we would know who it was. So in an environment like that, maybe the police aren't completely necessary. Okay. Where the town is so small that if a crime is committed, individuals are going to know who it was and they're going to know how it went down. But the fact of the matter is that we don't live in a society like that. Our societies are huge. And even if you have one town here, okay, and another town here, town A, town B, maybe any crime committed by someone from town A in town A, they would know about it. But what if town A goes and commits a crime against town B? Okay. And all of a sudden, these little sovereign towns or cities can start, warring with each other because maybe the one town harbors the criminals that are attacking this other town. I mean, this was proven through literally centuries of city states as the world existed in the past, where one town becomes stronger than the other, they would go and ransack the other town. And not until there was a central power over all the land could that be prevented. Okay, that's the anarchist state. The anarchist state is perhaps open combat between these small towns and these small villages. One of the other arguments against the private police force, and this also, I can highlight this argument from an example from ancient Rome. In the ancient Roman Republic, there was a man named Crassus. He was one of the richest senators and the most powerful men the Roman Republic had ever seen. He got rich because he owned a fire company. Back in those days, in ancient Rome, if your house caught on fire, you had to pay the fire company to put the fire out. So what Crassus would do is a house would catch on fire. His fire company would respond to the fire. They would tell the people who own the house, pay us now, or else we're going to let your house burn. So they would pay the fire company and they would put the house out. If they didn't have the money, what the fire company would say to these people is, we'll put the fire out, okay, but now we get ownership of your house and you rent from us. Or we'll put the fire out, you give us the house, you keep all the belongings inside. And Crassus actually he did this all over the city of Rome in the ancient republic, and it helped make him ridiculously rich. So you get rid of the police force, you have private police forces. That's what this world, our societies would be reduced to, is one security force going after a crime has been committed, say a house was robbed, and saying, okay, well, we'll go and investigate, you better pay us. And at that point in time, they may be able to charge exorbitant amounts of money, okay, to get the service, or those people would just not get the service. They would not get the benefit of the service because they couldn't afford it. Their house was probably just robbed, and then a crime goes unpunished. So in my opinion, the anarchist theory of having no police, it may be functional on a small level in a small town on an island off the coast of Ireland where everybody knows everybody and a police force isn't needed. But I don't believe that it's practical for modern societies with huge urban and metropolitan areas. You need a central force to provide that deterrent over all the people who live there so that strangers aren't committing crimes against strangers. When everyone in the town knows somebody, yeah, crime is much more unlikely and easier to restrict. But when strangers can attack or take advantage of strangers, there's a much greater incentive to commit crime. And without that universal police force, it's my opinion that crime would go through the roof. Now, anarchists have a lot of interesting theories about reducing crime. And I actually abide by many of their theories, such as decriminalizing marijuana, perhaps other drugs, decriminalizing a lot of things in this world that we currently have as criminal. But if we're going to do that, I think at the same time, you need this central police force. Great theory on this issue comes from Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan. Perhaps I will do a show just on Leviathan because I think it's very applicable to the criminal law. It's also applicable to politics. It's probably one of the greatest works of political philosophy ever written. But the general argument is that a central government, a strong central power, helps to keep the peace within the society. Now, of course, there's usurping elements. There's negative elements to such a strong central power, but there are many positive ones as well, such as keeping the peace. So you ask me, yeah, we need the modern police force. It needs to be based on a tax system so that whoever you are, rich, middle class, or poor, you can have the benefit of a policing force which will investigate, capture, and deter from crimes. It's not a perfect system, and many wrongs come from it, but it's better than a system where someone has to pay after a crime has already occurred and they can be charged exorbitant prices, where strangers may be incentivized to rob or commit crimes against other strangers, and where I believe, in my opinion, crime would be increased without that central authority. So more crime and less solved crime. Now, if you got rid of the crime first, then maybe you can get rid of the police force. Okay, and I think maybe that's the crux of the anarchist argument. Maybe I'll have to talk to Michael Malice. But getting rid of the police before you get rid of the crime, in my opinion, is not a good idea. So thank you for tuning in. This is attorney Joe Palmetto at Joe Palmetto Law. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I'm coming on this show to talk about topics related to the criminal law, gun rights, the police, and whatever else my audience would like to hear. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, like, and share. Subscribe, like, and share. Also, leave me a comment. I will get back to you. I'd love to hear your opinions and also any suggestions you have for future shows. Thank you, Yolanda, for tuning in, and I will see everyone soon.